Welcome to Scary Horror Podcasts, where we dive deep into terrifying tales that will send chills down your spine. Tonight, we bring you three spine chilling stories that will make you think twice before turning off the lights this Christmas Eve. From ghosts in the snow, an eerie rocking chair, to a whispering doll. Each story hides a fear that goes beyond explanation. Are you brave enough to hear them all and face the strange and sinister? Join us for a Christmas night like no other, where darkness never truly lets go. A ghostly Christmas Eve. Ah, Christmas Eve. It's a time for joy, isn't it? But I'll tell ya, not all Christmases are merry. Some hold shadows darker than the long winter nights. Sit down by the fire, kid. Let this old man tell you a tale you won't forget. It was the winter of 1953, back when I was just a young lad in Wyoming. We lived in an old house on the outskirts of town, isolated, creaky, and surrounded by endless snow-covered fields. On that Christmas Eve, a blizzard rolled in, the kind that howls like a wild beast. My parents were busy wrapping presents upstairs, so it was just me in the house. That's when I heard it. 3 loud knocks on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Now you might think, it's just a neighbor or a caroler, right? But no one sane would be out in that storm. Still, I shuffled to the door, pulling my blanket around me, and cracked it open just a hair. Nothing. The snow outside was untouched, the wind cutting through the night like a knife. I closed the door and locked it tight, but then I heard it again, this time from the back door. Knock, knock, knock. My heart raced. I didn't dare go to the back door. Instead, I peeked out the kitchen window, and that's when I saw her. A woman in a white dress, standing barefoot in the snow. Her long hair whipped around her pale face, and her eyes, oh, those eyes, were black as coal. She didn't move, just stared straight at me. I screamed for my parents, but when they came rushing down, she was gone. "It's just your imagination, Jimmy," my dad said, patting my head. But I knew what I saw. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard her again. Not knocking this time, scratching. Long, slow scratches on my bedroom window. I pulled the covers over my head, too scared to move, but curiosity got the better of me. When I peeked, there she was. Pressed against the glass, her mouth twisted into a grin so wide it didn't seem human. She mouthed 3 words, "Let me in." I don't remember much after that. My parents said they found me screaming, the window frosted over like a scene from a nightmare. We moved out of that house the following spring. Every Christmas Eve since, I think about her. Some nights, when the wind howls just right, I swear I still hear her knocking. Knock, knock, knock. So if you hear a knock tonight, you'd best think twice before opening the door. Merry Christmas, kid. Sleep tight. The Ghost in the Rocking Chair. Kid, if you thought the last story was chilling, brace yourself. This one happened when I was older, around 18, right before I left Wyoming to go to college. It was Christmas again, but this time I was at my grandmother's house in Kansas. Now, my grandma was a peculiar woman. She lived alone in an old farmhouse, the kind that creaks even when there's no wind. In her living room sat a worn rocking chair placed right in the center of the room. She always said it belonged to my grandpa, though he'd passed away long before I was born. "Never sit in that chair," she told me one day, her voice unusually stern. "That chair belongs to your grandpa. It's still his." I just laughed it off, thinking it was one of her quirky superstitions. On Christmas night, after dinner, my grandma went to bed early, as she always did. I stayed up late, sitting by the fireplace with a book. But as the clock struck midnight, I heard it. The rocking chair began to move. At first, it was just a faint creak, like the chair was shifting slightly. I looked up and saw it rocking back and forth, slowly. There was no wind, no draft, and all the windows were tightly shut. "It's just my imagination," I muttered to myself and tried to focus on my book. But the creaking grew louder, as if someone was sitting in the chair and rocking it harder. When I glanced up again, I swear I saw a faint figure in the chair. A tall man, dressed in an old-fashioned coat, sitting upright, his dark eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. I froze, unable to move. Then the figure spoke, his voice a low whisper that seemed to echo through the room. "Why do you sit here and not greet me?" My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. The rocking stopped, and the figure stood up. He began to walk toward me. Just as those dark eyes came within a few steps of me, I heard my grandma's voice call out from upstairs. "Jimmy, get up here now!" Her voice snapped me out of my terror. I bolted from the chair and ran up the stairs without looking back. The next morning, my grandma didn't say a word about it, and I didn't dare bring it up. But when I was leaving her house, I noticed something. The rocking chair was gone. To this day, I don't know what happened to it. Maybe she got rid of it, or maybe it vanished, taking my grandpa's ghost with it. So, kid, here's a word of advice. Never take lightly the belongings of the dead, especially on Christmas night. You never know. They might come back to claim what's theirs. Merry Christmas, if you can still sleep tonight. The Whispering Doll. You're still here, huh? Brave kid. Well, let me tell you one last story. This one still gives me the chills, even after all these years. It happened when I was in my 20s, visiting my cousin Lydia and her family in upstate New York for Christmas. Lydia had a daughter named Annie, about 6 years old. And Annie had a doll, one of those old porcelain dolls with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. The doll's name was Clara, and Annie adored her. She took Clara everywhere, talked to her like she was a real person. "Clara's my best friend," Annie would say, hugging the doll tightly. Lydia thought it was cute, but I always felt uneasy around that thing. Something about those lifeless eyes made my skin crawl. On Christmas Eve, after Annie went to bed, Lydia told me a strange story. "Annie says Clara talks to her," she said with a nervous laugh. "She claims Clara tells her things she couldn't possibly know." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Lydia hesitated. "Last week, Annie said Clara told her that the cat was going to die. The next morning, we found our cat cold and stiff in the yard. I don't know how she knew." Her voice trailed off, and she forced a smile. "It's just a kid's imagination, right?" I didn't say anything. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stayed up late reading by the fire. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. Then I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, more distinct. It was coming from Annie's room. My heart raced as I got up and crept toward the door. When I peeked inside, the sight froze me in my tracks. Annie was sitting upright in bed, holding Clara in her lap. But it wasn't Annie talking. Her lips weren't moving. The whispering, it was coming from the doll. "Annie, let me out. Let me out. You promised." My blood ran cold. Annie was staring at Clara, her eyes wide and unblinking. "I can't," she said in a trembling voice. "Mama will be mad." The doll's head turned slightly as if it was looking at me. "Let me out," it hissed. I don't remember screaming, but the next thing I knew, Lydia was shaking me awake on the floor outside Annie's room. "What happened?" she asked, her face pale. I couldn't explain it. The doll was back in its usual spot, lifeless and still. Annie was fast asleep, clutching Clara like nothing had happened. The next morning, I insisted we burn the doll. Lydia was hesitant, but after I told her what I'd seen, she agreed. We took Clara out to the backyard and threw her into the fire. As the flames consumed her, we heard a high-pitched scream, like the wail of a child. That was the last Christmas I spent with Lydia. She moved away a year later, and we lost touch. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, I still hear that whisper in my dreams. "Let me out." So kid, if you ever find an old doll lying around, don't pick it up. And whatever you do, don't listen to its whispers. Merry Christmas. May your toys always stay quiet. Thank you for tuning in to today's terrifying stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on the next creepy tale. Be sure to share this video with friends who dare to test their courage. And remember, never forget to turn off the lights before bed, because who knows, something might be watching you in the dark. See you in the next podcast episode, wishing you a Christmas night, peaceful or maybe not so peaceful.